The sun was setting over Springfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Officer Ryan Dawson was finishing his usual patrol route through the wealthy Oak Hills neighborhood. He'd been on the force for 8 years and had strong opinions about who belonged in this part of town. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, he spotted a black SUV with tinted windows moving slowly down the street. The vehicle wasn't speeding or breaking any traffic rules, but something about it made Dawson suspicious. He didn't bother to run the license plate or call for backup, he just flipped on his lights and siren. The SUV pulled over right away, stopping neatly by the curb. Dawson parked his patrol car and took his time stepping out. He adjusted his belt and placed his hand on his holster, a habit he'd developed over the years, especially when approaching vehicles he deemed suspicious. Through the tinted windows, he could barely make out the driver's silhouette. Probably doesn't live around here, Dawson thought to himself as he approached. The neighborhood was mostly white, and Dawson had his own ideas about who should be driving through these streets. The driver's window rolled down smoothly, revealing an African-American man in his 40s wearing a crisp white shirt. The man reached toward the glove compartment. In an instant, Dawson drew his weapon. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted, pointing his gun directly at the driver's head. His voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "Don't you move." The driver froze, his hands now visible, hovering in midair. "Sir, I'm reaching for my identification," the man said calmly, his voice steady despite having a gun aimed at him. "I don't care what you're reaching for. Hands on the steering wheel now." Dawson barked, stepping closer, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. The driver slowly placed his hands on the wheel. "Officer, I'm FBI Captain Thomas Wilson. My credentials are in the glove compartment." Dawson's expression didn't change. Instead, his grip on the gun tightened. "Yeah, right, and I'm the president. You expect me to believe that?" He spat out words laced with slurs that no officer should ever use. Captain Wilson remained remarkably composed. "Officer, I understand your concern, but I am indeed an FBI captain. If you'll allow me to show you my credentials—" "Shut up," Dawson cut him off. "People like you are always making up stories. One wrong move and I'll shoot, understand?" Neighbors were beginning to notice the commotion. A couple walking their dog slowed down to watch. Someone in a nearby house pulled back their curtains, but Dawson didn't seem to care about the growing audience. Captain Wilson tried again. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I'm heading home from work. My office is downtown. I've been with the FBI for 15 years. Dawson laughed coldly. "Sure you have. That's why you're driving around here looking at houses to rob, right?" Wilson's face remained neutral, but his eyes reflected both fear and determination. He'd faced discrimination before, but never with a gun pointed at his head by someone wearing a badge. "I live 3 blocks from here, officer," Wilson explained patiently. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 5 years." Dawson didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he reached for his radio with his free hand, never taking his eyes or his gun off Wilson. "Dispatch, I've got a suspicious individual here claiming to be FBI," he said into the radio. "Requesting backup on Maple Avenue." What Dawson didn't know was that Captain Wilson had subtly pressed a button on his phone when he first saw the patrol lights. The entire interaction was being recorded, every threat, every slur, every violation of protocol and basic human dignity. As Wilson sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, he thought about his 20-year career in law enforcement, the countless times he'd shown his badge, and how none of that seemed to matter in this moment. Despite the gun pointed at him, despite the hateful words, Wilson knew one thing for certain. This officer's actions would not go unanswered. The standoff continued for 7 long minutes. 7 minutes of Wilson's life hanging in the balance, all because Officer Dawson couldn't see past the color of his skin to the man and the badge behind it. Captain Wilson had developed a habit over the years that many of his friends and colleagues found strange. Whenever he was pulled over by police, which happened far more often than it should for a man of his position, he would immediately start recording. It wasn't paranoia. It was experience. That evening on Maple Avenue was no different. As soon as Officer Dawson's lights flashed behind him, Wilson's thumb had instinctively moved to his phone, tapping the recording app before placing the device face down on the passenger seat. What happened next would all be captured in crystal clear audio. I said, "Don't move." Dawson's voice was sharp in the evening air, the gun still aimed directly at Wilson's head. The recording picked up every word, every harsh breath, every threat. "Officer, I'm just sitting here with my hands on the wheel as instructed," Wilson replied, his voice remarkably steady. The recording captured the contrast. One man shouting, filled with unfounded rage. The other calm, professional, despite having a gun pointed at him. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car drove by slowly, the driver craning their neck to see what was happening. The recording caught these background sounds too, painting a picture of a peaceful neighborhood transformed by one officer's prejudice. "You know how many people try to lie their way out of trouble?" Dawson sneered. "Everyone's got a story. Everyone's somebody important when they get pulled over." His dismissive tone came through clearly on the recording, as did the slurs he casually tossed out between sentences. The recording captured the slight tremor in Wilson's voice when he spoke again, not from fear, but from restraint. "Officer, I understand the pressures of your job. I've been in law enforcement for 20 years. All I'm asking is that you allow me to show you my credentials." 20 years, huh? Dawson laughed. "And I suppose you drive this fancy SUV on a government salary?" The recording caught the tap of his knuckles against the window frame, the jingle of his keys as he shifted his weight. 7 minutes. The recording would later show that Wilson was held at gunpoint for 7 full minutes. 420 seconds of having a weapon aimed at his head for nothing more than driving while black in an affluent neighborhood. In the background of the recording, the sound of another police siren grew louder. Backup was arriving. The recording captured the squeal of brakes, a car door slamming, footsteps approaching. "What's the situation?" a new voice asked. This was Officer Chen, a 15-year veteran of the force. "Got this guy claiming he's FBI," Dawson said, gun still drawn. "Wouldn't be surprised if the car's stolen." There was a pause on the recording, then Officer Chen's surprised voice. "Captain Wilson." The atmosphere changed instantly. The recording picked up Dawson's confused "You know him?" "He led the joint task force with our department last year," Chen said, her voice a mix of respect and embarrassment. "Captain, I'm so sorry about this." The recording captured the sound of Dawson's gun finally being holstered, the click of the safety being engaged. Too little, too late. "Officer Dawson, lower your weapon immediately," Chen ordered, her voice now firm with authority. The recording caught Dawson's mumbled excuse, something about just following protocol, but the damage was done. Wilson remained calm as he was finally allowed to retrieve his credentials. The recording picked up the sound of the glove compartment opening, papers being shuffled. "As you can see, Officer Dawson, I am indeed FBI Captain Thomas Wilson," he said, presenting his badge and ID. "And this entire interaction has been recorded." The silence that followed spoke volumes. The recording captured Dawson's sharp intake of breath, the shuffling of his feet. Officer Chen could be heard apologizing profusely, but Wilson's response was measured. "This isn't about you, Officer Chen. But what happened here tonight cannot be ignored." As Wilson was finally allowed to leave, the recording captured his controlled breathing, a technique he learned years ago to manage stress. He drove exactly 3 blocks to his home, pulled into his driveway, and only then did his hands begin to shake. Inside his house, he played back the recording. Every threat, every slur, every violation of his rights, all preserved in digital memory. Tomorrow, he would file a formal complaint. Tonight, he just needed to process how close he'd come to becoming another statistic, another headline, another tragedy, all because one officer couldn't see past the color of his skin. The morning after the incident, Captain Wilson sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. He hadn't slept much. The feeling of having a gun pointed at his head kept replaying in his mind. His wife had held him close all night, neither of them saying much. Some things were beyond words. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. She knew the answer already. Wilson nodded, taking the mug. "If not me, then who?" He clicked the submit button on his formal complaint form. "If I stay quiet, nothing changes." By noon, Wilson's phone was ringing nonstop. The recording had made its way up the chain of command, both within the police department and the FBI. What had happened to him wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. Police Chief Rodriguez called personally. "Captain Wilson, I just heard the recording." I can't even begin to apologize for Officer Dawson's actions. This is not what our department stands for." Wilson appreciated the call, but knew words alone wouldn't fix the problem. "I understand, Chief, but I need to know what you're planning to do about it." That afternoon, Wilson walked into the police station to give his official statement. Officers looked away as he passed, some from shame, others from discomfort. He kept his head high. This wasn't his first experience with discrimination, just the most dangerous one. In a small interview room, Detective Lopez recorded Wilson's statement. "Please tell me exactly what happened yesterday evening," she said, her voice professional but kind. For the next hour, Wilson recounted every detail: the initial stop, the drawn weapon, the threats, the slurs. Detective Lopez didn't interrupt, just took careful notes. "And you have a recording of the entire incident," she confirmed. Wilson handed over a copy of the audio file, every second of it. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Officer Dawson was being questioned by Internal Affairs. He sat slouched in his chair, arms crossed defensively. "It was a high-risk stop," he insisted. "You weren't there. You don't know what it's like on the streets." Lieutenant Parker played a portion of the recording. "Does this sound like proper procedure to you, Officer Dawson? Threatening to shoot someone who's clearly complying with your orders?" Dawson shifted uncomfortably. He was reaching for something. I didn't know what. "He told you he was FBI and was reaching for his credentials," Parker countered. "And you held him at gunpoint for 7 minutes after that." Across town at the FBI office, Director Thompson listened to the recording with a grim expression. Captain Wilson was one of his best agents, respected, decorated, professional. The thought that he could have been shot during a routine traffic stop turned Thompson's stomach. "I want the Department of Justice involved," Thompson said to his assistant. "This goes beyond local police misconduct. This is a civil rights violation." By evening, news of the incident had spread. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from his teenage son. "Dad, you're on the news." Wilson turned on the TV to see a reporter standing outside the police station. Sources confirmed that an FBI captain was held at gunpoint by a local police officer in what appears to be a case of racial profiling, the reporter was saying. The officer allegedly used racial slurs and threatened to shoot the federal agent, who was simply driving home through his own neighborhood. Wilson turned off the TV. He hadn't wanted publicity, just accountability. His phone rang again. It was Chief Rodriguez. "Officer Dawson has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation," he said, "but I want you to know we're taking this very seriously." Wilson thanked him, but knew administrative leave wasn't enough. Not for someone who had pulled a gun on an innocent man and threatened his life. Later that night, as Wilson helped his younger daughter with her homework, she asked a question that broke his heart. "Dad, why did that police officer want to hurt you if you didn't do anything wrong?" Wilson set down the pencil and looked into his daughter's eyes. How could he explain something so complex, so painful, to a child? But she deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes people make judgments about others based on what they look like, not who they are," he said gently. "That's why it's so important to stand up when something is wrong, even when it's scary." His daughter nodded thoughtfully. "Like you're doing now?" Wilson hugged her close. "Exactly like that. Because things only change when brave people speak up." 2 weeks after the incident, the investigation into Officer Dawson was gaining momentum. What had started as a single complaint was turning into something much bigger. Detective Reynolds sat in a cramped office surrounded by boxes of files. He'd been tasked with reviewing Dawson's entire service record, every complaint, every incident report, every performance review. What he found disturbed him deeply. "This isn't an isolated incident," Reynolds told Lieutenant Baker, dropping another folder onto the growing pile on the desk. "Dawson has 17 complaints of excessive force in his file. 12 of them involve minority citizens." Baker frowned. How did this many complaints get buried? "Most were dismissed for lack of evidence or settled quietly," Reynolds explained. "But the pattern is clear if you're actually looking for it." Meanwhile, a tech specialist was reviewing years of Dawson's body camera footage. He called Captain Wilson's attorney with what he found. "You need to see this," he said. "I've got multiple videos showing similar behavior toward minority drivers. In one case from last year, he draws his weapon on a college student just for asking why he was pulled over. The footage was damning. In video after video, Dawson could be seen treating white drivers with casual respect while approaching minority drivers with his hand already on his weapon. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Officer Patel, who had worked with Dawson for 3 years, finally came forward. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted to Internal Affairs. "He used to brag about how he could always spot troublemakers in certain neighborhoods. He had a nickname for pulling over black drivers in nice cars. He called it fishing for felons." The investigation expanded beyond Dawson's on-duty behavior. With a warrant, investigators gained access to his personal social media accounts and found dozens of posts containing racist content. In private groups, he'd shared memes mocking police brutality victims and had made comments about cleaning up certain neighborhoods. At home, Captain Wilson was trying to maintain normalcy for his family while cooperating fully with the investigation. His phone rang during dinner one evening. Another former colleague of Officer Dawson's wanted to speak up. "I worked with him 5 years ago," the officer explained. During training, he told rookie officers to be extra suspicious of certain types in nice cars or nice neighborhoods. "I reported it to my supervisor back then, but nothing happened." These testimonies were painting a picture not just of one bad incident, but of a career built on prejudice. The police chief called an emergency meeting with department heads. "This goes beyond one officer," he said gravely. "We need to look at why these complaints were ignored for years. Who signed off on dismissing them? Who knew and did nothing?" Across town, FBI Director Johnson was having a similar conversation with Department of Justice officials. "We're looking at potential civil rights violations spanning years," he explained, "and a department-wide failure to address them." Captain Wilson was asked to review some of the evidence collected. Sitting in a conference room at the FBI office, he watched body camera footage showing Dawson's interactions with other minority citizens. Each video reminded him of his own experience. The same unnecessary aggression, the same dehumanizing language. How many of these people didn't have the protection of a badge? Wilson wondered aloud. How many didn't have the ability to record what happened to them? His colleague nodded grimly. "That's exactly why this case matters so much. It's not just about you." 4 months after the traffic stop that could have cost Wilson his life, the evidence was overwhelming. What had started as an investigation into one incident had revealed years of unchecked bias and aggression protected by a system that looked the other way. The district attorney called Wilson personally. "We're moving forward with an indictment," she said. "Multiple charges, civil rights violations, threatening a federal officer, unlawful detention. And we're expanding our investigation to include supervisors who buried previous complaints." That evening, Wilson sat on his back porch, watching his children play in the yard. His wife joined him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I just heard about the indictment," she said. "How are you feeling?" Wilson took a deep breath. Like maybe, just maybe, something might actually change this time. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras on the morning of the indictment. Officer Dawson walked up those steps with his attorney beside him, his face stony and eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Gone was the confident swagger he'd shown during his years on patrol. Gone was the authority he'd wielded so recklessly. Inside the courtroom, Captain Wilson sat quietly in the back row. He didn't want to be the center of attention, but he needed to see this through. His wife squeezed his hand as the charges were read aloud. "The state brings charges of civil rights violations, threatening a federal officer, and unlawful detention under color of law," the prosecutor announced. The legal language was formal, but the message was clear. A badge doesn't give you the right to threaten innocent people. Dawson's attorney entered a plea of not guilty, claiming his client was simply following department protocol for high-risk stops. The judge wasn't impressed. "Your client held a gun on a fellow law enforcement officer for 7 minutes after seeing his credentials," she noted. "I'm having trouble seeing how that follows any legitimate protocol." News of the indictment spread quickly through the police department. Some officers were angry, viewing it as an attack on all police. Others felt relief. Finally, someone was being held accountable for actions that made their jobs harder. "Do you know how many times I've had people tell me they're afraid to talk to police?" Officer Rivera said in the break room. "This is why. One bad officer ruins trust for all of us. The police chief called a department-wide meeting that afternoon. As of today, Officer Dawson has been officially terminated, he announced. This department will not tolerate bigotry or excessive force. Not anymore. Some officers applauded. Others looked at their shoes. Change was coming, whether they liked it or not. At home that evening, Wilson's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Fellow agents, former colleagues, even officers he'd never met wanted to express their support. One call stood out, an elderly gentleman who identified himself as a retired police officer. "I've been following your case," the man said, his voice wavering with age. 40 years ago, the same thing happened to me. No one believed me then. No recording, no witnesses willing to speak up. Thank you for standing your ground. Thank you for making them listen. Wilson thought about that call for a long time afterward. How many others had suffered similar treatment with no recourse? How many incidents had gone unreported, unpunished, unchanged? As the weeks passed, the prosecution built its case. The audio recording was their strongest evidence, Dawson's own words condemning him. But they also had the body camera footage showing similar behavior toward other drivers, the testimony from former colleagues about his racist comments, and the social media posts revealing his true attitudes. This isn't about one traffic stop gone wrong, the lead prosecutor explained during a press conference. This is about a pattern of behavior that put people's lives at risk and violated their civil rights. Dawson's attorney tried to get the social media evidence thrown out, claiming it was his client's private speech. The judge denied the motion. When an officer sworn to protect all citizens equally expresses contempt for certain groups of those citizens, it speaks directly to his fitness for duty and his credibility, she ruled. Captain Wilson met with the prosecution team to prepare his testimony. They wanted him to describe how it felt to have a gun pointed at his head by someone who was supposed to be on the same side. "Just tell the truth," the prosecutor advised. "Your experience matters. People need to hear it." Wilson nodded, thinking about the retired officer who'd called him. "I'll tell my story," he promised. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who couldn't." The night before the trial was set to begin, Wilson sat with his children, helping them with homework just like any other evening. His daughter looked up from her history book. "Dad, we're learning about people who changed things," she said. "People who stood up when something was wrong, even when it was hard." Wilson smiled. "And what do you think about that?" She thought for a moment. "I think it takes courage, like what you're doing." Wilson hugged her close, his eyes damp. Tomorrow he would walk into that courtroom not just as an FBI captain, not just as a victim of prejudice, but as someone fighting for change. The path wouldn't be easy, but with his family's support, he was ready to face whatever came next. The trial began on a crisp Monday morning. TV vans lined the street outside the courthouse, and journalists from across the country filled the gallery. This wasn't just a local story anymore, it had touched a nerve nationwide. Captain Wilson arrived early, walking through a side entrance to avoid the cameras. His wife walked beside him, her quiet strength a comfort. In the hallway, they ran into the district attorney. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her expression serious but kind. Wilson nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom fell silent as Wilson took the witness stand. He had testified in hundreds of cases throughout his career, but never as a victim. His voice remained steady as he recounted what happened that evening, the initial stop, the drawn gun, the threats, the fear. "Even after I identified myself as FBI and offered to show my credentials, Officer Dawson kept his weapon pointed at my head," Wilson explained. "He used language I won't repeat in this courtroom, but the recording speaks for itself." The prosecutor played the audio recording. The raw hatred in Dawson's voice echoed through the speakers, making several jurors visibly uncomfortable. One older woman in the front row shook her head in disbelief. When cross-examination began, Dawson's attorney tried to paint the incident as a misunderstanding during a high-stress situation. "Officer Dawson couldn't clearly see into your vehicle due to the tinted windows, isn't that correct?" the defense attorney asked. "The windows were legally tinted," Wilson replied calmly. "And once I rolled them down, he had a clear view of me and my empty hands on the steering wheel." "And isn't it true that certain neighborhoods have higher crime rates, requiring officers to be more vigilant?" Wilson didn't take the bait. I live in that neighborhood. I have for 5 years. And vigilance doesn't justify threatening to shoot someone who's complying with all instructions. The defense attorney tried another angle. In your years of law enforcement, haven't you ever made a split-second judgment that, in hindsight, might have been different? Wilson leaned forward slightly. Yes, I have. But I've never held someone at gunpoint for 7 minutes after learning they were a fellow officer. I've never used racial slurs against the people I'm sworn to protect. Those aren't split-second judgments, counsel. Those are choices. Over the next 2 weeks, witness after witness took the stand. Former colleagues described Dawson's comments about minority communities. Technical experts explained how the pattern in his body camera footage showed targeted harassment. Police trainers testified that his actions violated every protocol for traffic stops. Dawson himself finally took the stand, claiming he feared for his safety during the stop. But under cross-examination, his story fell apart. If you truly feared for your safety, the prosecutor asked, why did your body camera record you joking with Officer Chen about putting him in his place after you learned Captain Wilson was FBI? Dawson had no good answer. In the gallery, Captain Wilson watched the man who had threatened his life squirm under questioning. He felt no joy, only a profound sadness that someone entrusted with a badge and gun could abuse that power so completely. During closing arguments, Dawson's attorney painted him as a dedicated officer who had made a mistake in a dangerous job. Police work is hard, he told the jury. Split-second decisions can mean life or death. Before you judge Officer Dawson too harshly, ask yourselves if you could do better in his position. The prosecutor stood slowly, looking each juror in the eye before speaking. This case isn't about a split-second decision, she said. It's about 7 minutes. 7 minutes during which Officer Dawson pointed a gun at an innocent man who had identified himself as FBI. 7 minutes during which he used racial slurs and threats. 7 minutes that reveal exactly who Ryan Dawson is when he thinks no one is holding him accountable. She played a short clip from the recording again, just Dawson's voice saying, "People like you don't belong in this neighborhood." "Those aren't the words of someone making a tough call under pressure," she said quietly. "Those are the words of someone who never should have worn a badge." The jury filed out to begin deliberations. Captain Wilson left the courtroom, stepping into the afternoon sunlight. Whatever happened next, he had done his part. He had spoken his truth. Now it was in the jury's hands. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. For a complex trial that had lasted 3 weeks, this was remarkably fast. Word spread quickly, and people rushed back to the courthouse. Captain Wilson sat with his family in the front row. His teenage son gripped his arm nervously. His wife held his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. They had lived with this case for months, the threats, the media attention, the strain on their daily lives. Now finally, they would know the outcome. The courtroom fell silent as the jury filed in. Their faces gave nothing away, but several avoided looking at Dawson. The judge called for the verdict. "On the count of civil rights violations, how do you find?" The jury foreperson stood, paper trembling slightly in her hand. "We find the defendant guilty." A murmur swept through the courtroom. "On the count of threatening a federal officer?" "Guilty." "On the count of unlawful detention under color of law?" "Guilty." Captain Wilson closed his eyes briefly. He felt neither joy nor triumph, only relief that the system had worked as it should. Beside him, his wife wiped away a tear. Dawson showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his shoulders slumped noticeably. His attorney placed a hand on his arm and whispered something. Whatever future he had imagined for himself was gone now. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and officers led Dawson away. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Captain Wilson. "What are your thoughts on the verdict?" one shouted. Wilson looked directly into the cameras. "This case was never about me," he said quietly. "It was about accountability. It was about making sure that those entrusted with badges and guns use that power responsibly. No one should fear the people sworn to protect them." The sentencing hearing came 4 weeks later. The courtroom was packed as Judge Rivera took her seat. Known for her fairness and thorough approach, she had reviewed dozens of victim impact statements, not just from Captain Wilson, but from others who had encountered Dawson during his years on the force. Before I deliver my sentence, the judge began, I want to address something important. Mr. Dawson, you have repeatedly claimed that you were just doing your job, following protocol, making split-second decisions in a dangerous world. She paused, looking directly at the former officer. I've reviewed hours of your body camera footage. I've read statements from your colleagues. I've listened to that 7-minute recording. None of what you did to Captain Wilson was part of your job. You betrayed your oath. You betrayed your badge. You betrayed the public trust. Her voice was calm but firm, each word carrying weight. The damage you've done goes beyond one traffic stop. Every person who heard about your actions now trusts police officers a little less. Every minority driver in this city now feels a little less safe. Every good officer now has to work a little harder to prove they're not like you. She lifted her gavel. Taking all factors into consideration, I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. The sentence sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. It was one of the harshest penalties ever given to an officer for misconduct. Some called it excessive, but many saw it as long overdue accountability. 2 months later, Captain Wilson stood before a group of new police recruits. The police chief had asked him to speak about ethics and responsibility. A strange request, perhaps, but one Wilson had accepted immediately. The badge you'll wear isn't just metal, he told them. It's a promise to the community. A promise that you'll protect everyone equally, respect everyone's rights, and hold yourself to the highest standard. He saw understanding in their young faces. These officers would start their careers knowing that accountability matters. Back at the FBI office, Wilson had been promoted to lead a new civil rights division, focusing on law enforcement accountability nationwide. His experience had given him unique insight into both sides of the badge. At home that evening, his daughter showed him her school project, an essay about everyday heroes. I wrote about you, Dad, she said proudly. About how one person speaking up can change things. Wilson hugged her close. The case had been difficult, painful even. But if it helped create a world where his children could feel safe regardless of who pulled them over, it had been worth it. As he watched his family at dinner that night, Wilson thought about justice, not as an abstract concept, but as something real people had to fight for, one brave step at a time.